in a private drawer at Mill House. A friend who knew her for decades says Camilla kept one letter she never once let Charles read, guarding it through 2 marriages, and every year the palace pretended nothing was happening. If quiet, source-based royal histories like this one are worth your time, subscribing costs nothing, and the bell means you will not miss the next one. It was not a love note from him. It was something else entirely. And after all this time, a friend has finally chosen to explain why she kept it. Think about that for a moment. A queen. A woman who waited most of her adult life to marry the man she loved. And when she finally had him, when the wedding was done and the title was hers, she still kept a single sheet of paper hidden from him. Sealed. Tucked out of sight, never handed over, not when they were young, not when they were old, not even on the day she became his wife. You think you know this love story. You know the version the palace let you have, the scandal, the tapes, the second wedding, the slow public rehabilitation of the most disliked woman in Britain. But the version you were told skips the one object that, according to this friend, held the truth of who she really was. So let us start where the friend starts, not with the letter itself, not yet, but with the drawer. A plain writing drawer in a country house in Wiltshire, the kind of house Camilla retreated to when the world got loud. Behind that drawer, out of sight, out of the papers, sat a folded page in her own hand. She could have burned it 100 times. She never did. To understand why, you have to go back to the beginning, to the moment 2 strangers on a wet English afternoon decided they liked each other. 1970. A polo field at Windsor, the horses churning the grass, the small crowd along the ropes, the smell of leather and rain. A young woman named Camilla Shand is standing at the edge of it all. She is bright, funny, a little irreverent, entirely unbothered by the grandeur of the place. And across the field is a shy young prince, 21 years old, not yet the man the tabloids would later dissect. His name is Charles. They are introduced, and here comes the line, the one his circle would repeat for years. Camilla, so the story goes, looked at him and mentioned her great-grandmother. Alice Keppel had been the mistress of his great-great-grandfather, King Edward VII. It was known. It was history. Most people would have kept quiet about a thing like that in front of a prince. Camilla did the opposite. She reportedly said something to the effect of, "My great-grandmother was the mistress of your great-great-grandfather. So how about it?" A bloodline joke, a wink across a century, cheeky, self-aware, completely without fear, and it worked. It broke the ice in a way nothing polite ever could have, because Charles, hemmed in by protocol his whole life, surrounded by people who bowed and softened and measured every word, had just met someone who treated him like a person and not a position. That was the thing about Camilla. She was not impressed by him. She simply liked him. Friends said the two of them were easy together, in a way he had rarely known. She laughed at the right things. She did not perform. When she was in the room, he relaxed. For a while, that was enough. They rode. They talked. They saw each other. It looked to the people around them like the start of something real. And then the Navy took him. Charles had a duty and a career waiting at sea. And in the early 70s, he sailed away for long stretches, months at a time, the way young royal men were expected to. There was no plan spoken aloud, no promise made in plain words, just a young couple who assumed, the way young couples do, that there would be time, that the thing between them would still be there when the ship came back. It was not, because while Charles was away, another man was not. Andrew Parker Bowles, a cavalry officer, older, charming, established. He had known Camilla before, drifted in and out of her life, and now, with the prince gone to sea, he was present in the way that matters, attentive, there, and in 1973, Camilla Shand married him. Think about the timing. Charles at sea, unreachable, assuming the door was still open. Camilla on shore, waiting for a man who had not said the words, and choosing instead the man who had. Friends called that marriage the wound that never healed. Not a scandal at the time, not front-page news, just a quiet society wedding. A photograph in a chapel, a bride in a pale dress next to an army officer. To the world, an ordinary match between two people of the same class. To Charles, a door closing that he had been too slow to walk through. Because here is what those close to him said he believed, and went on believing for years, that he had let her go, that he had had the thing every person searches for, the person who makes the noise stop, and he had been too young, too unsure, too bound by what was expected of him, and he had waited too long. By the time he understood what she was to him, she belonged to someone else. He did not lose her to a rival in his own telling. He lost her to his own hesitation. And Camilla, what did she feel? Married now, the prince gone, the easy afternoons at Windsor already turning into memory. That is where the friend leans in, because this is the moment the letter enters the story. Ask yourself when a woman writes something down and then refuses to send it. Not a letter she posts, not words she says to a face, something she commits to paper in private and then locks away, unread by the one person it might concern. People do that at exactly one kind of moment, when the thing they need to say can no longer change anything, when the door is already shut and speaking would only make the sound of it closing louder. So here is the first question. This whole story turns on, and I want you to hold it because it does not get answered easily. When did she write it? And what, in her own hand, did it actually say? The friend is careful here, the way people are careful about things that still matter. She does not hand you the words. Not yet. She gives you the timing, and the timing tells you almost everything. Friends placed the writing of that letter in the mid-1970s, in the raw aftermath of her marriage, when the new wife was learning her new life, and the prince she had liked so easily was somewhere out on the water, abroad and unreachable. In that gap, with him gone, and no way to reach him, and nothing left to fix, she is said to have sat down and written the thing she could not say to his face, and then she did not send it. She sealed it away instead. A folded page, an envelope closed, a private truth put somewhere no one would find it. Not posted to a ship at sea, not slipped into his hand years later, just kept, held back, guarded, the first act of a habit that would define the rest of her life, and the one object that, decades on, a friend would finally decide the world was allowed to know about. Sending it would have changed nothing, friends said. Keeping it changed her. And while that sealed page sat in the drawer, the two of them began orbiting each other across the most public marriage in the world. Because by the start of the 1980s, Charles had a problem the Crown demanded he solve. He needed a wife, not a woman with a past, not a divorcee, not Camilla. He needed someone young, unmarried, and untouched by scandal. And in 1981, the country handed him a story it wanted to believe in. On the 29th of July, Lady Diana Spencer walked up the aisle of St. Paul's Cathedral in a dress with a train that seemed to go on forever. Millions watched. Crowds filled the mall. And then the two of them stepped onto the balcony at Buckingham Palace and kissed. And the whole thing looked like the happiest ending a nation could invent. That was the picture. That was the fairy tale the public was given, and for a long time the public kept it. But the people close to the couple watched something colder. Staff noticed the small things first. The long silences, the separate schedules, a young princess who arrived radiant and grew thinner and quieter as the months went on. Friends of Charles knew there was another woman he still spoke to, still leaned on, still called, and Camilla, married to Andrew Parker Bowles, living her own life on paper, remained the person he trusted with the things he could tell no one else. The marriage the world was celebrating and the marriage the staff were witnessing were two different marriages. One was for the cameras, the other was the truth, and the truth had a third person in it. For years, that stayed behind palace doors, rumour, gossip, whispers that never quite touched print, out of sight, out of the papers. And then, in one long night in 1989, the door came off its hinges. A private telephone call between Charles and Camilla was recorded, not by the palace, by someone scanning the airwaves, catching a mobile phone conversation that was never meant for another living soul. The tape sat around for a couple of years before the newspapers finally printed it, and when they did, it became known as the Camilla-gate tape. It was intimate. It was tender. It was two people who clearly loved each other, talking the way lovers talk when they think no one is listening. And suddenly, the thing the palace had refused to confirm for a decade was there in black and white, on the front page, being read aloud in living rooms across Britain. The country was scandalised, but notice where the anger went. Not at the institution that had arranged a doomed marriage. Not really at the prince who had gone along with it. It went at her. Remember, everyone heard that tape. Almost no one asked what it cost her. Because overnight, Camilla Parker Bowles became the most hated woman in Britain. The other woman, the home wrecker, the villain in the story of the beautiful young princess everyone had fallen in love with in 1981. Tabloid front pages turned her name into a punchline. Cartoonists drew her cruelly. Strangers who had never met her decided they knew exactly who she was, and what they decided was that she was the reason a fairy tale had died, and it did not stay on the page. A friend of Camilla's later recalled what it was actually like to be her in those years, doing something as ordinary as the weekly shop. People threw bread rolls at her in the supermarket. On one occasion, so the friend remembered it, someone hurled things at her trolley in the car park, at a woman pushing a cart of groceries, because the papers had told them she was fair game. Think about that image for a second. Not a state occasion, not a press conference. A woman shielding her face in a supermarket car park while strangers used her as target practice for a marriage she had never been part of and a decision she had never made. She did not respond. She did not give an interview. She did not go on television to explain herself or to defend her side of the story. She said nothing, and she absorbed it, week after week, year after year. And here is the detail that changes how you see all of it, through every headline, through the tape, through the bricks and the bread rolls and the front pages. That one letter she had written in the mid-1970s stayed exactly where it was, in the private drawer at Raymill House, untouched, unsent, unshown. Stop and sit with that. She had, in a drawer, the one thing that was genuinely hers, a page from her own hand, from her own worst years, that spoke to who she really was, underneath the cartoon the country had drawn. And in the very moment when the whole nation had decided she was a villain, when producing something, anything, to say I am not the person you think I am might have helped, she left it in the dark. She did not wave it. She did not leak it back. She let the villain stand. Why? That is the question the whole story turns on, and it only gets stranger the longer she is silent, because the pressure did not last a season. It lasted decades. Charles and Diana separated in 1992. They divorced in 1996. And then, in the summer of 1997, Diana died in a car crash in Paris, and the grief that swept Britain came with an unspoken verdict attached. In the public mind, if Diana was the wronged saint, then Camilla was the woman who had wronged her. The hatred did not soften after 1997. For a time, it hardened. So Camilla went quiet in a different way. She stayed off the balconies. She stayed out of the frame, out of sight, out of the papers, while the palace slowly, carefully, over years, tried to rebuild her public face one small appearance at a time, and still the letter stayed in the drawer. Diana was gone, and she did not reach for it. Then, the last obstacles fell away. Her own marriage to Andrew Parker Bowles had ended in divorce back in 1995. Andrew was no longer in the picture, and on the 9th of April, 2005, at a civil ceremony in Windsor, Camilla married the man she had loved and lost and waited for across more than 30 years. No cathedral this time. No balcony crowd in the hundreds of thousands. A quiet register office wedding, and then a blessing. But it was real, and it was legal, and at the end of it she was his wife. She had made it. After everything, she had arrived at the one thing the whole ordeal had been about. She was safe now. She was the Prince of Wales's wife, soon to be a queen. The two people whose presence had made her the villain, Diana and Andrew, were both out of the story. Nothing could touch her the way the tape and the trolley once had. Now stop and ask the obvious question the papers never did. Why, in that moment, did she not simply take the letter out of the drawer? She was finally free to. She could have shown it to Charles at last, the man she had waited a lifetime to marry. She could have used it to explain, quietly, to the one person who mattered, who she had really been through all those terrible years. Or, if it was too painful, she could have burned it, closed the book, let the worst decade of her life turn to ash. Either would have made sense. Either is what most people would have done. She did neither. By 2005, she was safe. She was his wife. Diana was gone, and Andrew was gone. And the one thing that could have proven her side to the whole country was still sitting in that drawer, unsent and unshown, because the letter, her friend says, was never really meant for Charles to read at all. Never really meant for Charles to read at all. That is the sentence that unlocks everything, because it means the letter was not a love note she was too shy to give, and not a weapon she was saving for the right moment. To understand what it actually was, you have to look at the woman the aides describe. They describe someone who took decades of blame and never once tried to shift it. Think about that. For the better part of 30 years, Camilla was the name the country used when it wanted a villain. And in all that time, she gave no interview to defend herself. No tearful sit-down. No friendly journalist handed the other side of the story. Aides who worked near her say she had every chance and turned each one down. That silence was a choice, and it cost her. When you say nothing, the other version wins by default. The public had Diana, luminous and wounded and speaking directly to the cameras, and it had Camilla saying nothing at all, so the country decided. It decided she was the woman who broke the fairy tale, and she let it decide, because the friends and aides who knew the private arithmetic understood something the public did not. Fighting for her own story would have cost Charles more than it cost her. Every word she spoke in her own defence would have dragged him back into the same headlines, forced him to pick a side out loud, turned a private mess into a public trial with him in the dock. So she let Diana own the story. not because she agreed with it, because the price of correcting it was paid by the man she loved, not by her, and she had already decided she would rather carry the weight than hand it to him. And that is where the letter stops being a mystery and starts making a different kind of sense. For most of this story, you have been picturing it the way anyone would. A secret, something with power in it, waiting, the one card she never played. But look again at how she lived. A woman who absorbed a country's contempt without answering it does not sit on a trump card for 30 years. That is not who the aides describe. The letter was not a weapon. It was restraint made physical. She kept it the way she kept everything else about herself. Folded away, out of sight, out of the papers. The same instinct that kept her quiet through the worst years, kept that single page in a drawer. It was not hidden because it was dangerous. It was hidden because that is simply what she did with the parts of herself she refused to let the country touch. So here, at last, is what the friend finally said, the part she guarded for decades, the reason the page never left the drawer, the answer to the question you have been holding since the beginning. The letter was not addressed to Charles. Read that again. She did not write it to him. She wrote it to herself. There was no recipient, no stamp that was never licked, no envelope waiting for the right year. The letter written by Camilla to herself was exactly that. In the mid-1970s, in the raw aftermath of a marriage she entered, because the man she wanted had sailed away, with Charles abroad and unreachable, she sat down and wrote to the only person who would ever read it, herself. And what she wrote, the friend says, was a promise made in her worst year, a promise that whatever came next, whatever the newspapers made of her, whatever name the country pinned to her face, she would not let the monarchy erase the private woman inside the public villain. She wrote down who she was before anyone had decided who she was. She put it on paper so that on the days she could barely recognise herself, there would be proof. This is you. This is who you were before all of it. Suddenly, every strange choice in this story clicks into place. Why not send it? Because it was never going anywhere. Why not burn it after Diana died in 1997? Because burning it would burn the proof. Why not hand it to Charles in 2005 when she was finally his wife and the whole ordeal was behind them? Because that was the one thing she could never do. The day she showed it to anyone, even him, the promise inside it would break. The letter only worked as long as it stayed unread. It was a private truth, and a private truth handed to another person stops being private. Give it to Charles, and it becomes something the institution can hold. A document, a piece of the record. One more thing that belongs to the crown instead of to her. The moment she let it out of the drawer, it would stop being hers, and being hers was the entire point. So it stayed. Through Camilla Gate, through the brick thrown at her supermarket trolley, through the years she was the most hated woman in Britain. That page sat in the dark at Ray Mill House, and she never reached for it. Not to comfort herself in public, not to prove anything to the reporters camped at the gate. She kept it the way her great-grandmother Alice Keppel might have understood. A private life held completely apart from the crown that consumed everything else. The bloodline that first drew Charles to her carried this too. The knowledge that the palace takes what you show it, so you show it as little as you can. If these quiet, source-based royal histories are worth your time, subscribing costs nothing, and more stories exactly like this one are already waiting. Ring the bell and you will not miss the next one. Now, back to the drawer, because that is where she left it. A woman who became Queen of the United Kingdom, who stood in Westminster Abbey in 2023 and was crowned beside the man she had waited a lifetime to marry, and who still, even then, kept one page he was never allowed to read. Think about the sheer patience of that. 50 years of waiting to become his wife, and even after she got there, one small thing she would not give him. Not out of spite, out of the opposite, because it was the last piece of herself that belonged to no one but her. Think about the last time you kept something not to hide it, but to remember who you were. An old letter, a photograph you never framed, something you would never explain to anyone, because explaining it would flatten it into a story other people could handle. That is what the page in that drawer was. Not evidence, not leverage, a private proof of a self the public never got to vote on. And this is what it tells us now, at the end, about the gap this whole story sits in. The country thought it understood Camilla. It built her out of a leaked phone call and a divorce and the grief of a princess the whole world loved. It decided she was simple, the other woman, the villain in someone else's fairy tale. And the entire time, in a drawer at a farmhouse in Wiltshire, there was a version of her the country never saw and was never meant to. A woman who, in her lowest year, chose to protect the private truth of herself so carefully that she would not even trust it to the man she loved. That is the reframe. The villain Britain invented was, in the account of the people who actually knew her, a woman of almost unbearable restraint, someone who let the worst be said about her because answering back would have hurt him, someone who guarded one page for 50 years, not because it was explosive, but because it was the only part of her the crown could never own. The public image and the private reality were never close. They were opposites. Separated by a single folded sheet of paper nobody was allowed to open. So picture it one last time. Ray Mill House. Quiet. The papers full of a queen. The nation thinks it finally understands. And somewhere inside, a drawer sliding shut. One page in the dark. A promise she made to herself when she had nothing. Kept whole because she never let a single soul read it. Not the reporters, not the palace, not even the king who slept beside her. A queen who married the man she waited a lifetime for, and still, out of sight, out of the papers, kept one truth for herself alone.